This is K-12 Tech Talk. K-12 Tech Talk. The podcast by K-12 Techs for K-12 Techs. Real conversations, real arguments, and real banter on trending K-12 technology topics and issues.
Coming to you live from Washington, D.C., Arlington, Richmond. I don't really know where we're at, Mark. Where are we at?
It's all the above. We're in D.C.
Coming to you from D.C., we are at the A4L Summit hanging out.
Yeah.
You came in last night. I came in yesterday. I fast walked all over the place. Saw all the things. Went to the White House. Went to all the monuments. All of them.
You did a massive tour of D.C. in a very short amount of time.
Took a bunch of pictures me, a selfie with Abe Lincoln, a selfie with Jefferson.
Wow.
I took on a sunburn.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
And then you came in. We ate last night. We hung out. Josh is not here.
Josh isn't here.
Jackson, who's been on the podcast once or twice.
Yep. His son.
Graduating.
So
he has a lot of preparations for that party coming up, I think.
Wait, did you just gave the name of Josh's son? We're at a privacy conference. We just broke the first rule of data privacy.
So we are at the A4L Summit talking about student data privacy, interoperability.
Yep. We're going to learn all about what A4L is as an organization and talk to some great people.
That's the plan.
That's the plan. You think we'll do well?
I really don't know.
This will be fun.
And we did unpack. We are for student data privacy.
Yeah. And there's not too many people who are against it.
But I tend to lean towards just tell me what to do.
Okay.
I'm not in the trenches of trying to figure out how to do it.
Okay.
But A4L is.
Yeah. And the people who are going to tell you what to do they're in the room today and they're going to tell us what to do.
I'm ready. It's going to be a good day.
Let's do it. Okay. We're here with Steve Smith, the founder or organizer of this. We've called you
the Godfather.
We've called you the Godfather of data privacy on the podcast a couple of times. And you've been on the podcast too. So tell us where we are and what we're doing here.
I think last time I was on the podcast, I was the CIO in Cambridge Public Schools. We were focused on my student data privacy work. Since then, I've moved on from Cambridge Public Schools and became the executive director of Access for Learning, which is the overarching organization that the Student Data Privacy Consortium lives in and was founded in. Today, we're at the A4L and PESC conference in Arlington, Virginia. PESC is the Post-Secondary Education Standards Council, so they address data interoperability standards in higher ed, where Access for Learning addresses data standards in K-12, as well as student data privacy.
How much overlap is there between the two organizations?
Well, there's more and more. We are consciously trying to bring the two organizations together. Historically, each one's been in their own segment. But now when we think about lifelong learning and the continuum of students from pre-K through, elementary, middle school, secondary, and into post-secondary and into the workforce, it shouldn't be segmented, right? We shouldn't have different standards and data not flowing. So the whole idea of bringing these organizations together, and I should mention that HR Open is here as well, which is the standard body for HR data in the workforce. So we're really trying to make it easy and seamless for the data to follow the learners from pre-K right up through until they get into the workforce. So that includes through post-secondary, and post-secondary is changing dramatically too. It's not just getting degrees anymore, it's credentialing. So having an actual learner record that follows them into employment.
So A4L is an organization. Can you describe what the purpose of that group is and what do you focus on? Because it's not just about privacy, it's also interoperability.
Because we're in D.C. and we were thinking about getting A4L tattoos. And before we commit to that, we need to know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Well, you might want to look at another one before you get it, because there's different styles. So,
Wait, does somebody have an A4L tattoo?
You'll have to ask around.
I knew it. These data privacy people. I knew it.
Oh, yeah.
They're hardcore.
You can't tell us because it's private information. So, okay. All right.
Steve, is it okay if we call you Steve? Is that too much privacy?
No, that's good.
Okay.
So A4L, it historically started as a K-12 student data standards organization in 1997, developing standards for both the infrastructure moving of data as well as the data model for student data itself. It's very closely aligned to CEDS, the Common Education Data Standard that the feds put out. It's used in probably 8 or so states for their data collection, including Massachusetts, as Mark knows. Their SIS sends data on a regular basis every 2 minutes or whatever to the state using the SIF data standard. It hasn't always been an easy road. There's been many struggles over the years to get these standards to work. When I first went to Massachusetts, I think everyone was swearing about SIF, as it was called then. It was Schools Interoperability Framework was the original name. But now it just works in the background. So things are really maturing to the point where hopefully the standards are doing what they're supposed to do. But again, it's segmented K-12, higher ed, and we're really trying to make them work together.
In Missouri, you guys have EdFi that you just announced that is being adopted, right?
So years away, but yes.
Yep. Yeah. So there's multiple standards, EdFi and then One EdTech are really the 3 major bodies.
Yep.
I will also want to point out that those 3 major bodies are having leadership changes. Myself taking over A4L. The other 2 executive directors are gone or have announced that they're leaving.
Yeah.
And my focus is really to start talking about collaboration between those.
Great.
Because as a district leader for 28 years, we get stuck in the middle, right, of these standards wars and trying to make that go away. The whole theme of this is collaboration between standards bodies to ease the process.
Yeah, we're having to support all 3, and we're always trying to balance which one do we use for which circumstance. So it's challenging. But and so how does privacy interact with interoperability? Because interoperability, I think of as more of a technical thing. You're getting your systems to talk to each other. You're aligning your data standards and data formats between systems and organizations.
Yep.
Where does privacy sit in A4L?
Yep. So that's a really good question, Mark, because currently they are somewhat separate. And when I founded the Student Data Privacy Consortium and founded it within A4L, some people said, why are you doing this in a standards body? It doesn't make sense, right? So the focus of SDPC so far has been around the legal obligations of student data privacy, as you know, getting DPAs in place, bringing the marketplace together on what those obligations are. But we are also now leveraging the interoperability side of A4L to start. 2 years ago, we published what we call PODS, Privacy Obligation Document Spec, within the infrastructure spec, so we can move privacy metadata over the wire. So that when we do exchange data, the pods also exchange what those obligations are. So we could see eventually the marketplace consuming those pods as a way for, as you know, the bigger edtech vendors that have attorneys here, they have developers here, they have security folks here. They don't all know what those obligations are because the attorneys negotiate a contract and developers are building something. This way we'll ensure that before data actually flows, everyone understands what their obligations are and they've acknowledged that. So that's kind of the tie. The privacy obligations need to follow the data. And it also needs to follow it into higher ed and into the workforce as we're sharing that data.
So practically speaking, that means I'm going to share, this file of students and their date of birth. And by the way, along with that file of data, I'm going to share your obligation once our contract is over. Should you have a breach, like this date of birth needs to be treated in this way.
Exactly. Yep.
Very cool. Okay.
Yep. What we're trying to figure out is the districts see the need for it because we want vendors, we were in my prior role as a district, want vendors to acknowledge and confirm that they know what their obligations are before we share data. Vendors don't yet see the value, right? Yeah. What's in it for them? It's like something extra they have to do.
Right.
So we've been doing a couple different pilots and working with vendors to figure out what is the right sweet spot to introduce it. And it may just be market pressure, right? Eventually districts saying, you've just got to do this with our data like we do with DPAs.
Okay.
And the other piece I do want to touch on that is a huge project of A4L and the Student Data Privacy Consortium is around security. Because as you know, from previous podcasts, all the attention focused on cybersecurity for schools is really about in schools, in their systems but 90% of the student data, where does it live? It's not living in the schools.
Right.
It's at the ed tech vendors, right? So what are we doing there? And there's very little focus on that. CISA has come out with a little bit of guidance for districts. This is what you should ask school districts to do.
Yeah.
COSIN's got the K-12 CVAT. So we've had a project going on for about 3 years where we created and published what we call the Global Education Security Standard, which is a crosswalk between all the existing frameworks and requirements in different jurisdictions. But it's a common set of controls that we are anticipating the marketplace adopt as the set of controls that need to be in place for all education data.
So if you're talking to a school district that's interested in getting involved or interested in either coming to this conference or looking at other events, what would you recommend? A
couple things. Definitely just go right to the A4L website, a4l.org. But, we do have alliances in 28 state alliances, our formal student data privacy consortium groups. There's a chance if you're in one of those states, there's already a group that you can join. Other states, there are districts that are participating. So the 35 of the states actually have districts participating. Reach out to your peers, find out if anyone's involved and join on the bandwagon. If not, just reach out directly to me, even smith@a4l.org.
Well, thank you very much for having us. We're excited to see what you guys have on the agenda and talk to a few people.
Great.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't you introduce yourself and what company you're from?
Okay, I'm Steve Setzer. I'm the CEO of Loop Data. Loop Data is an integrator providing data integration services to districts and states. We're very small. We have 2 states, and outside of those states, we have about a half a dozen district customers.
Interoperability has been a topic we've talked about a lot. Many of the people who listen to this are going to be the integrators in their school districts. Tell us specifically about SIF. What is SIF and how does it work?
SIF is a data interchange solution. It specifies a data model and a transport model, which makes it a little different from many other systems that only specify a data model. It gives a standard definition of here's a student, here's all the elements of a student, so that you can take data from, say, a student information system and transform it into the SIF format, transport it to, say, a library system, and then use that student data to automatically enroll the student in there. The key difference, particularly from a district tech director perspective, is that SIF is event-based, and I'm not going to use the word real-time because that means different things to different people.
Yeah.
It's very fast. So literally in a SIF district, I have put together districts where a student comes in the middle of the school year, and within 5 minutes, after being enrolled in the SIS, their library card, lunch account, and bus route have all been assigned in those 3 different systems that came from different vendors, different databases, and everything else. And no one had to do anything other than add the student to the SIS.
Sounds great.
Sounds great. I'm actually in a SIF district myself. We use SIF to communicate to the state. So student is enrolled in the school district before, and I say this to principals, before the student even makes it to their homeroom, the state already knows that they exist, that they're enrolled in your school, and in theory, what their schedule is.
Right.
So that's the goal. Where is SIF today, and where is it going?
SIF started out trying to solve the first problem I described, the school local problem. Somewhere around 2007, the vendors involved in SIF saw that there was a lot of money coming out of the federal government to assist states in their state reporting requirements.
Yep.
And so a lot of the effort shifted to that. There were some ups and downs, some organizational missteps. Between that focus change and the organizational missteps, SIF fell out of favor as a district interoperability solution. Mm-hmm. For a while, it was growing quickly, and there were vendors, literally dozens of vendors. I know because one of my jobs in the 2000s was to sell a development toolkit, and I made 60 sales of that developer toolkit, and my competitor, I think, even sold more. So there were a lot of people building SIF agents to communicate and vendors adopting it. As the SIF market stagnated and as those vendors came out with new products, they tended to go to proprietary APIs or back to classic flat file, since SIF at its largest got maybe 10% of the school districts in the country. And so you still had to have another method of integrating.
Steve, you're telling a sad story right now about
I
SIF.
am.
What a downer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but it's the truth. SIF continued to do well in the state markets.
Yeah.
And then, but the district market has always been what's close to my heart. And that's, so I'm just telling you the truth. I told you.
Yeah.
And so
Sad Sif.
one of the final barriers was that everyone got excited about REST. SIF adopted the REST architecture. The way most people implement REST is you issue a query and you get your results back immediately. That's really good if you're going against, say, Amazon or, say, a data warehouse for a grocery store. It's a terrible model if what you're hitting is an SIS, which is the most highly used and most transactional system in a district. It's not optimized for big reports on demand any time of the day.
Right.
And so when SIF adopted that, that was the final nail. The SIS vendors weren't going to support it. Fast forward.
More bad news from Steve.
Fast forward several years. SIF has taken the best of all of its former data models, including the older ones, brought them into a new model called Unity for North America.
Oh, okay.
And so that happened about 3 or 4 years ago. So that was good news.
Okay.
Last year, SIF released a version for, or a new implementation called delayed queues for SIS providers. They'd had delayed for consumers before. Now they added delayed for providers. And that goes back to what SIF originally did, which was allow you to queue a request and then the other application could fulfill it when it was ready. That's what happens now with this. And with that, the SIS vendors were much more interested in getting on board, and that's where Loop Data comes in. We have the contract in the state of Virginia to run their SIF-based student ID system. It's similar to yours. You add a student to your SIS, and 5 minutes later, their state ID is back in the SIS. We've been doing that on SIF2 for 20 years. Multiple vendors changed over time. But we have approval from the state, and we are working with the SIS vendors to implement their very first modern REST-based SIF Unity compatible agents to connect to that because of the delayed architecture. So we have 5 SISs in use in Virginia that are going to be on July 1 ready to connect. We're going to dump the SIS connections on the old architecture. Once they have the connection, they can add more data elements. And so we anticipate that next year and the year after, all of the other SIF states, the other 10 or 12 SIF states, will be able to migrate to this as they tell their SIS vendors, okay, add these more data elements. And the vendors that are filling the roles there that we fill in Virginia, the vendors like Cedar Labs, will just add those queues, and it will be a totally easy transition.
Well, thank you so much. This is a very, very brief but very jam-packed overview of what SIF is and hopefully where we're going as an industry. So
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Steve sent over Wes Sims. Wes, how's it going?
Going great.
Wes, we don't know anything about you.
Fantastic. Happy to help.
So if you would introduce yourself, and we were explaining to you, the listeners that we have are just like us. We don't know a whole lot about student data privacy. We care about it.
Yep.
We care about interoperability, but we're here at this summit to learn more. So you were sent over to explain maybe how you fit into that or how your organization fits into that. So would you give that a shot for us?
Sure thing. I'll do the best I can. So I think student data privacy is a very front of mind topic now as we put kids in these schools, and we want to make sure that they're safe, their data is safe, that we're not unnecessarily monetizing that data, and that we're taking the appropriate precautions inside the school during the academic day. I think one of the challenges is that there's, a new part of the day called the last class, which is when they head out onto the field or into the auditorium, teams, clubs, groups, extracurricular activities, where there isn't as much, not just enforcement, but even awareness and advocacy and education around privacy. And there are a lot of vendors in that space, just as there are inside the school, and one of which is us. And so we see ourselves as kind of a market leader coming in and making sure that our space is effectively not necessarily just regulated, but that we can provide some tools and some context for folks that probably care about privacy, or at least are worried about the possible negative outcomes of bad privacy policy. But it's not as front of mind as it is in the school environment.
You're from an organization called Snap Mobile, which I thought for the first 5 minutes that you were like a cell phone provider, but what does your company do?
We started in online digital fundraising. We basically pioneered the space of online digital fundraising. And if you think about fundraising going back 25 years or more, traditionally fundraising was product-based, which meant we're going to sell popcorn, we're going to sell sweetbreads, discount cards, cookie dough, things like that. And looking at that space about 10 years ago, our founder realized that the folks that hand over cash for a candy bar probably don't want the candy bar. They just want to help the kid. And online digital fundraising made sense because everyone's online, everyone has a phone. They might not carry cash, but they're certainly willing to help if you make the right appeal and send the message at the right time and connect that supporter to a kid. They want to help the kids, but they don't necessarily need 4 loaves of sweetbread that they have to, mow through before it goes moldy or they have to throw it out. So
fundraising when I was in high school, I remember biking around my neighborhood. I was a very, very small town, and biking around and just knocking on random doors with a piece of paper. And by the end of my route, I had everybody's name, address, and a pocket full of cash. So I could see why, I can understand why you guys want to get into privacy.
That doesn't sound right. That's not very...
I can't believe we did that, but we did that to all of our students. So where is your company pushing the envelope or trying to push this conversation in terms of introducing privacy and working with athletic directors and fundraisers?
I think 2 things. Number one is that, that the halcyon days of us being able to ride our bikes around town are kind of a distant memory. It's not to say that those fundraisers can't work. I think what we're trying to do is take some of the risk or de-risk fundraising in that manner. So it's not so much sending kids out into the streets with pockets full of cash, which we joke all the time internally. It's like it's one of those things where you say, I can't believe we used to do it that way.
Yeah.
But, the market's certainly evolved. And I think what happens is that those fundraising mechanisms and methods still exist. I think ADs, coaches, our primary audience group leaders, they're focused on the kids, and they're focused on getting the kids what they need.
Yeah.
They're not focused 20 yards downfield, so to speak, thinking about the impact or ramifications of privacy and how that can impact a kid's life, whether near-term or long-term, or put them potentially in a dangerous situation. We don't want to be heavy-handed with our audience and come in and mandate a bunch of privacy controls and standards. It's really more education. And so we're taking the approach of making sure that we provide some contextual framework around things that might be more risky versus less risky and help educate our primary audience on best practices to make sure that not only can they keep the kids safe, but they can maximize really their ROI and not take on a third job. If you're a coach, a mentor, and if you're running a fundraising program, you're a professional fundraiser because you're chasing these kids around like herding cats. And so if we can make that easy and de-risk it and then provide some education up front on best practices, I think that's a big win for us and for the industry.
So how do you do that with coaches? Do you sit them down, make them go through 10 pages of policy documents and make them read FERPA and all that stuff? Or how do you break it down?
That's a recipe for disaster. I don't even think I could do that. So, it's really, to use your example of riding a bike around on a route with cash. It's kind of a red, yellow, green stoplight analogy where we would say red is sending kids out into a neighborhood with a pocket full of cash to help raise money by selling candy bars or cookie dough or subscriptions. A yellow might be sending them out with just an order form and not the cash because it's a little less risky.
Yep.
Green would be, let's look at how we can solicit that same market or even a broader market, possibly digitally, without, putting kids in the community physically.
Yeah.
Right.
Very cool. So your focus really is on not just data privacy, but also student protections and student safety. So
yeah, our founder was a high school football player, went on to play college football, came back to his coach and basically his high school coach and said, how can I help? Like every high school coach, that coach needed money for his program. his basic approach was to go out and do the same thing he had always done, sell the product and raise the money that way, when he realized that there was a better way to do it that could probably help a lot more kids in a much more meaningful way, and looked at the phone in his hand and said, let's solve for this. And we found a really great way to activate millions of supporters. Everyone wants to help kids that are, whether it's on the debate team or on the football field or in band. The kids all have needs. They all have supporters. Supporters all want to help, and they just want to be able to do it as meaningfully and as easily as possible. And so,
all right. Well, thanks, Wes.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you introduce yourself for our listeners and talk about what organization you're with?
Sure. I'm Connie Coy. I'm a cybersecurity analyst for the Missouri Research and Education Network. And we also have started diving into student data privacy.
Yeah, I'm all the way here in D.C., and I managed to find someone from Missouri.
Yes.
From MOREnet. So you and MOREnet do work with A4L. Would you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. So A4L is the umbrella group of the Student Data Privacy Consortium. So A4L, the Student Data Privacy Consortium, was a side group from A4L. They decided, once we're talking about all the standards and implications of the standards, that they needed to incorporate privacy into that. And the Student Data Privacy Consortium is a network of nationwide states, districts, consortiums that come together to use the National Data Privacy Agreement that's made available and the resource registry to upload and track those agreements. And so we joined as an alliance member, MOREnet did. And if you're a MOREnet member, you can access those services for free with your membership. And we've done this for about 4 years now, and they just came out with the NDPA version 2, so we're very excited about that, to make that available for our members.
So I had sent Josh, who's not here, this text, and I kind of ripped off of the keynote. He said something, and then I manipulated it. I said, there are two kinds of people in the world, those that care about student data privacy and those that don't know what the crap they're talking about.
Yeah.
So would you tell me, if I'm in Missouri or if I'm across the nation, I'm in a one-person tech department, I got a long list of things that I'm worried about. I'm worried about the printer working for that elementary teacher. I'm fixing the smart board. I'm implementing a new SIS. Student data privacy should be on my list.
Yes.
Would you just tell me, why is that important?
Okay. If you are sharing PII with a third-party vendor, per FERPA, they must be designated as a school official, or you need parental consent. So everybody knows the easiest is to be designated as a school official. And so understanding, number one, what all the applications are that your district is using is a huge undertaking, but making sure that that data is protected per FERPA is another huge undertaking for the districts. But it's an important piece of cybersecurity for your district also. And so what we're here to help with is getting that data privacy agreement. There's a very streamlined process with the NDPA to help districts with that. We understand it is a huge undertaking. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to educate your teachers and administrators on why this is important. But you're looking at, the students' lifelong digital footprint and reducing that as much as possible, and really protecting that student and their data.
So when I, as a tech director, my school district's looking at a new website or new application, a new program, I can either work on a DPA on my own, or I can try to work with an organization that does that work for me.
That is correct. And we have a standardized, like I say, national DPA. So all the vendors are pretty much aware of this and they understand how it works. We also just signed on with Tech out in the East, which is a consortium of states, and they have another program that we're partnering with them on to even reduce that load for the school districts. And so that's all explained on our website. But it is to streamline, simplify, protect our students. And that's what we're hoping that all the districts in Missouri are moving toward.
Okay. And that's for the big picture thing for A4L. That's what A4L is all about as well.
That
One
is
of
correct.
a couple of things.
Yeah, data standards integration, and also with their global education security standard, which they looked at NIST, CIS, and they've also looked at what Australia and New Zealand has done in this area. And so the global education security standard is included in NDPA version 2 as a framework. And what it is we pull the controls from CIS and NIST that are pertinent to K-20 data that they use in those in K-20. And this is for the EdTech vendors. So the EdTech vendors will say that they are compliant with GES. And so that gives the district even more, I guess, a level of comfort knowing that EdTech vendor has really looked at what they're pulling and how they're using it.
Yeah, great. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with me, Connie.
Thank you.
Ramah, thanks for hanging out with me for a few minutes. Would you introduce yourself, talk about why you're here, what you're doing here?
I'm currently the co-chair of the A4L Association Board.
Okay.
I've been involved with student data privacy since 2016. I work for the Education Cooperative. We are a Massachusetts school collaborative.
Okay.
We exist to help districts do things together, collaboratively, that they find difficult to do on their own because of lack of money, lack of human resources. So in 2016, we put together, at their request, a program to help them secure signed data privacy agreements with their digital providers.
Okay.
And it just took off like wildfire. We started with just our 14 member districts, and now we're providing this service to districts in 8 states. So well over 1,000 districts participate. So we use an 8-state data privacy agreement. So any district in those 8 states can piggyback on that DPA through Exhibit E. So my hope is that someday we're using a 50-state DPA.
Right.
And that we're able to help every district in every state protect the privacy of every student in this country.
Okay, so DPAs for some school districts is new or uncharted territory. Would you talk about, okay, we're signing up for an application, we're signing up for a website, we're agreeing to terms and services, but why get a DPA?
A school district doesn't have the right to share student information with a third party without one of two things. Either making that third party provider a school official under the FERPA school official exception.
Okay.
Best practice is to do that through a data privacy agreement. So now you've met the requirements of FERPA, you can share that student information with that third party. The other alternative is to get written parent consent, which is really difficult for schools to manage. You know, you have 30 kids in a classroom, maybe 25 parents will sign the consent form, 5 don't. What do you do with those 5 kids? How do you deliver the curriculum to those 5 kids? And just managing those consent forms is really, really difficult for schools. So most opt to go the data privacy agreement route.
What's the best way for me to get started? Are there templates available? Should I reach out to an organization?
Yeah.
Like what should I do?
So you could join the Student Data Privacy Consortium, SDPC. It's a subsidiary of Access for Learning, also called A4L. They have a national data privacy agreement template that you can use. It's very well accepted by third-party providers around the country. It's not unknown to them. They see it, they know they've signed it before with other states or other districts. So it's pretty easy to get it signed. That's the best way to do this work is by partnering with the Student Data Privacy Consortium. I can't even imagine trying to do this on your own. I don't even know where you would start. You would need an attorney to draft a data privacy agreement. It would just be hard to start from scratch. And we're a community. We help each other. So if you join, then we will help you get started. We'll tell you pain points to watch out for, easier way to do things. It's a wonderful community.
We've talked about on the podcast, I want others to do this work for me. Mm-hmm. If the work has been done, sign me up and just let me join that group.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for hanging out with me.
Thank you.
All right, this is the hot seat with Josh Olstad. Josh, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been on this podcast like at least twice, maybe 3 times. I don't even know.
Yeah, it's been a couple times.
So we decided to up the ante, just a little bit with you. So I know that
Oh,
you brought like
brother.
a book of things, and we're gonna get to your book of notes.
no.
I think.
All right, good.
Well, so we prepared 3 heavy hitting questions. One of them is a trick question, though. We're gonna see if you can get through this. Question number 1: what is your social security number? Question 2: Chris, you got it written
Like
down here.
why? Okay, I'm a tech at my school.
Yep.
I didn't used to hear about data privacy agreements. Last couple years, okay, DPA this. It's become like this.
Yeah.
Is it a trend? Is it a fad? Like, why should I care about a DPA in my school district?
That is a good question. There's been various incidents where schools have been targeted and sensitive data has been shared either through a breach or or just accidentally. Sometimes people put stuff in the Google Drive and don't realize they haven't shared to anyone.
Yep.
And people have found that. And there's been instances where students' personal information around like IEPs and what services they receive.
Mhm.
And so when that sensitive kind of information actually gets out there, you run the risk of those kids being bullied for, maybe having a learning disability or other things.
So, okay, but I'm going to push you on that one.
Yeah.
Does a data privacy agreement prevent that from
Well,
happening?
That's a good point. It does not,
Well,
but
you've
this is the
failed. Question 2. That wasn't even the trick. Okay, so proactive versus reactive.
Yep.
What's
Yes.
the role?
What's the role?
What's the role of a DPA? Is
What's the role
is
of
it
a DPA?
proactive or
Yeah.
is it reactive?
I think for the most part, it's there to protect the district if something does happen, because then you have the legal means to go out and engage with that vendor, in terms of if there's harm that's been done and there's a cost associated with that, or if there's a need for some sort of monitoring protection service. I'm thinking of like social security numbers, but
Yeah.
and in this case, I don't think there's anything that would cover like an IEP or something like that. But there could be some things out there that may need to be done, financial remuneration or something. The reason why we're using them in New Hampshire outside of the law is the role of the DPA is to define what my responsibilities are as a district and then what the vendor's responsibilities are, because you have federal laws. We have the big 3, FERPA, COPA, and
That's
PPRA.
question 3 too. But
Yeah.
we'll get to that in a second. But go ahead.
And each one of those targets different people. Like FERPA is targeted at us, but COPA is targeted at the vendor.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have something out there that really defines what my responsibilities are. And especially under FERPA, once we use that student official exemption and I say, I'm going to share, Mark's providing me a service. So I'm going to share my student data with Mark. And so once I use that school official exemption to share that, there's roles and responsibilities that you have, because essentially I'm making you a extension of the district, almost like an employee, giving you those rights and responsibilities. So it's a little bit of both, but I think it probably is more heavy on the front end of trying to get all that stuff up front and then going through the process of developing the DPA and trying to understand it. I think, there's some learning that is done, from the district level.
This adds some complexity to the last question, which is what law requires us to do this? So now in your state, you have specific state laws
Yes.
that require this.
Yes.
Not all states
Kind
have
of.
that.
I should say kind of.
Kind of.
Kind of.
Yeah, so we have established that you care about kids. That's why you do a DPA. Like, it's for the good of the kids.
Okay.
Yes.
And then that you're trying to also protect the district
Yes.
and have established
Yes.
district's responsibilities and vendors' responsibilities.
Correct.
That's clearly defined.
Correct.
But then to dig deeper, do I have to?
Yeah. So is there a federal law requirement that school districts enact DPAs with all their vendors?
It's best practice from the PTAC at the Federal Department of Education to have some sort of agreement in place specifically for exercising the school official exemption, or any number of them, because it's not the only one. So as far as I know, nothing at the federal level says you have to have a DPA. They say it's good to have something in place, a document other than us signing their privacy policy or us signing their terms of service. It's something that we're giving to the vendor and saying, here's the things you need to follow. Now, when you get to the state level, I think Illinois is the only state that is.
Did he just say Illinois?
Illinois. I said Illinois.
Yeah, there's no S.
There's
That's
no
just you.
S. I think
You're the only one that's ever done that.
He threw an S
No.
at the end. We're going to go back to the recording.
I think Illinois is the
Well, once again, thank you, Josh, for joining us. Josh?
Well, and I also want to congratulate you guys on the was it 100,000 episode download?
Weird thing.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
That's exciting.
All right. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you to our sponsors for letting trips like this happen. We want to thank Howard. You can email Seth Shockley at sshockley@howard.com. They are your pro services team. They're always willing to help you if you have any kind of project. They can take existing equipment and help you move forward to make everything work together, from networking to physical security to cybersecurity to your AV needs. They can help you from start to finish to make sure that you're happy with that final product. We want to thank Extreme, Dominic Mayer at extremenetworks.com, D Mayer at extremenetworks.com. We also want to thank Fortinet. You can email FortinetPodcast at Fortinet.com for all of your Forti needs and services and equipment. And last but not least, we thank ManagedMethods. Check out ManagedMethods.com, your Google Workspace and Microsoft 365 cloud security platform that specializes in your K-12 IT teams.
All right. We are here with Alex Jackl, who is the PESC and A4L board member. Did I get that right?
I'm Alex Jackl. I'm the CEO and president of Bardic Systems, which is a data management company.
Okay.
Small. We've got 5 people, right? But I'm on the board of PESC. I'm on the North American Leadership Group for A4L, and I'm also involved with lots of other standards bodies. I'm a co-chair of an IEEE group on credentials. I'm the co-lead of the task force for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'm the network chair for the Technology and Data Standards Network, working with the T3 Innovation Network. And I'm the chair of Data Standards United, which is not an organization, but rather an initiative of multiple organizations together to try and reduce the number of standards. There's not so many competing standards.
You're just generally against having any sort of free time whatsoever. You just
I don't believe in free time. Yes, that's correct.
Your last name is Jackl. Jackl of all
trades. That's right.
Exactly.
There you go.
Is that the first time you ever heard that?
That is actually, shockingly, the first time I've heard that. And I'm hoping never to hear it again.
Where's the thing? Yeah, there we go.
There we go. So we've talked a little bit with the A4L folks. Tell us about PESC. And so many of our listeners are K-12 folks. What is PESC? It's not an organization we've heard of too much.
Yeah, well, PESC is the Post-Secondary Standards Council, Education Standards Council, and it was actually formed exactly the same time as A4L. So A4L was formed in 1997-ish by Bill Gates started it, right, and then at exactly the same time, PESC was formed, and PESC was initially formed mostly to deal with financial aid standards, like building out the FAFSA. The FAFSA structure is actually designed by PESC. That's a PESC standard. The transcript that most of the electronic transcripts use, that's a PESC standard, right? So PESC was primarily driven initially by admissions officers and registrars at colleges.
FAFSA. What about Common App? Was that also
Common App? There were a lot of the PESC members worked on Common App, but Common App wasn't a PESC standard.
Got it. Okay.
Right. However, we were heavily involved in it, but it wasn't one of the standards we published.
Okay. So PESC being post-secondary, right, colleges, and then you're also on A4L, which is predominantly K-12.
That's right.
What's your role in the intermediary? What's the role or the goal of both of these organizations working together?
Well, first off, they have very different. There's not much overlap, right? In the sense that not only in the vertical segments, like, you have the early childhood to K-12, which is sort of A4L's domain, right? And then and PESC almost entirely focuses on the either 2-year or 4-year college and some graduate, college stuff. But also in orientation, PESC is more of a standards setting body that takes discrete standards, like, okay, we're going to build an e-portfolio. Mm-hmm. And then they build an e-portfolio, and then that's it. It's published. It's now an e-portfolio. The transcripts, they built that like 15 years ago, right? And it lives by itself. A4L has more of a homogeneous, centralized data model. And then all the objects and all the use cases all work off of that centralized data model, whereas PESC has these discrete projects that then get started and completed. And it's oriented around registrars, admissions officers, financial officers. That's sort of the area that they're mostly in. Whereas A4L is primarily around CIOs and the chief, the chief information officers and chief technology officers in the school districts. Okay. Right. So that's I would say that's the major discriminator there on that front. But why it's useful together is the truth is because there's no overlap. They're two relatively small organizations. These are not giant organizations. They're not funded the way EdFi is funded, right? By having someone just give them a check every year for dozens of thousands of dollars, right? But they're all run by membership fees. And so given that they don't have much competition, there's not like people paying membership fees to both, sharing things like accounting, legal fees, website fees, right? That kind of thing makes a lot of sense because all of a sudden then you can leverage your dollars a lot more and there's no loss of membership. It's not like you're competing with each other or anything like that, right? And so, and it's part of a larger initiative for having the fewer data standards. The joke about if there's 13 data standards, people are upset about it, so they go off and they create the 14th standard, right? That's actually the way it's been working, right? And so our goal is to go the opposite direction. Is take the 13 standards and let's have 9, right? Or let's have 8, right? We can't get down to 1 probably, right? But let's get down to 9 or maybe 7, right? If we're being really innovative, right? And so like that. So that's sort of the thinking. And both boards are aligned on that, and they're very close right now to coming to a legal agreement like shared bank accounts, shared resources, that kind of thing.
Okay,
cool.
Okay. So many people who listen to our podcast are, as you mentioned, K-12 tech directors, CIOs, more of the technical folks, the folks that are trying to fix the technical issues that arise.
Yes.
How do these two organizations, A4L and PESC, how are they going to help that particular audience? What are the data challenges, interoperability challenges, privacy challenges that these boards are trying to solve?
There are 3 levels of answer to that, right? There's a tactical, operational, and a strategic answer.
Okay.
The operational answer is for the K-12 people, it's more obvious, right? Because there's this massive surge of apps now, apps that teachers are using and stuff like that need the name of the kid. They need what class they're in. They need the list of classes that a teacher is teaching, right? So that if the teacher's going to use the app, so they can find their class and find their kids and assign things to their kids in the app. And that means there's a lot of data flying around about personal information, PII data about these kids. So one of the things that SIF provides is an infrastructure for securely moving that data from the SIS, say Power School or whatever the student information system is, Infinite Campus, whatever it is, right? And then moving that into either the LMS like Instructure or whatever it is, right? And then or to the app, some app on that teaching app that the teacher decides to use, hopefully approved by the district or some privacy or security work has been done on it, but maybe not. But and the goal of that is SIF's infrastructure is designed so that it can carry privacy information. It can actually carry what the contractual obligations are of the receiver, so that the app, it's right there. It's like, here's the contract. You cannot use this for anything other than assigning the kid homework or whatever that app might be doing. And PESC's main contribution, that PESC is now starting to adopt the SIF infrastructure because PESC doesn't have an infrastructure, right? So they're just going to adopt now. Because one of the things about Data Standards United is the goal of all these organizations involved is that if someone else has done it, don't reinvent the wheel. There's only so much money in the standard space, right? Let's
Yeah.
Let's use it wisely. If someone spends the money to build infrastructure, great, we'll use that infrastructure.
Okay.
If someone builds the money to build an e-portfolio, great, let's use that unless it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Sometimes the use cases don't match and you need to build another thing, right? But usually not. Usually people think they're a special flower and they're not a special flower.
I am a special flower.
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm not.
That's not what Alex just said.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. And hopefully we can get some more people who listen to this episode, and we'll come to the conference next year.
All right, how's it going? I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Sounds good. My name is Ben Silberglitt. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and one of the founders of a company called Cedar Labs. We're a data integration company. We provide a cloud-native data integration platform that takes data from systems, using whatever tooling those systems have to share data, moves that data, provides validation services around it, can layer privacy obligations on top of that data, and send that to consuming systems using whatever technology those systems have for receiving data.
Okay. Yeah, I know today. So we've done several interviews today, and Cedar Labs has been spoken of a couple of times throughout the day.
All good, I hope.
Good things. So I think let's just jump right into when you say what you just said. Give me some examples of that playing out in real life.
Sure. So we do a number of enterprise-level data integration projects. Currently, we're working with projects with the state of Iowa, state of Massachusetts, state of Maine, doing slightly different things in each case. In Iowa and Massachusetts, we're actually doing the state data collection from the districts. So their student information systems are providing data to us in real time. We're then providing validation to that data so that districts can see when their data doesn't meet state requirements and can actually make those changes in their source systems, which I think is really critical.
Yes.
Right? Designing those systems in a way that that source of truth becomes accurate rather than doing the data correction at the transformation, right? If you're doing it at the transformation, you're just going to perpetuate those errors, and you're also devaluing the data in those source systems. So what we do is really encourage that in the way we've designed those systems. They make those corrections, those data get provided, and then we can share those data either in real time or these static sort of certified visuals of the data, if you will, or sort of certified pictures of the data. We can ship those off to different consuming systems for downstream reporting needs, data warehousing, those kinds of things, and send that along.
Okay. So then in the subject of privacy, so you're working with a lot of data. So can you talk to me about what Cedar Labs does in regards to keeping students' data private, secure?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the keys to privacy is fewer hands on the data, right? And so one of the really unique features of the way that we've designed our data platform is it can not only help districts meet their needs in terms of state reporting, but they can now get value from that process. In the past, when districts needed to meet state reporting requirements, October 1st or October 15th rolls around, well, it's time to go through and clean up our picture of our data for state reporting. They spend a ton of time and energy getting that picture just right, meeting all those validation rules. They ship it off to the state and they never see it again. And so what happens in our platform instead is that those data get shared with the state in a way that the district is, again, correcting those data at their source system, right? Making cleaning that data so that the source system is accurate. But then the district actually owns that data flow and can share that with their own systems that they need to keep in sync. So you're now getting value back to the district for that data. So that helps with privacy because now instead of the districts having to manage a bunch of one-off connections, they have one pipe that they're managing that then forks that data in a hub and spoke model out to the idiosyncratic systems that they have and does it in unique ways with each system. So we provide the district with a no-code environment where they can control the flow of that data to those consuming systems and say, you've got let's take an example. You've got a teacher, algebra teacher, wants to try a new software system out, right? In the old days, one of two things would happen. The teacher would click the I agree button and just start entering kids' data directly into the system without telling the tech director that they were doing this, right? And they'd start launching this, not necessarily knowing or having the expertise to manage the privacy question around that implementation. Second thing that would happen is the teacher would work with the tech director to ship that data, but the tech director would be strapped. He or she has too much on their plate, and they would just kind of ship all of the data to that vendor, even though really it's this one teacher that's trying to use these data for a small subset of kids and probably only needs a limited set of that data at that, right? They probably don't need to be sending free reduced lunch information, special education information to that vendor necessarily. What we do is we give that tech leadership a no-code environment where they can say, here's exactly what data need to be sent, both in terms of scope of students, but also scope of data to those consuming systems. So that really helps enhance privacy by giving them that management.
Great. Okay.
The second thing that we're doing around privacy that I think is really interesting is we've been working with Access for Learning in the A4L community and the SDPC specifically around what's known as privacy obligation documents, which is a metadata layer on top of that data flow. So we've already managed the data flow to really narrow it down. But now we also want to communicate to that vendor to say, hey, we recognize that in that contract you signed with this district, you agreed to certain privacy obligations and certain security obligations for how you're going to treat that data. We want to make sure that you acknowledge that before you see the data. And so that, I think, really is critical for enforcement, especially in really large vendors. Often their legal team and their technology team are not in sync.
Right.
And the technology team might not know what legal has agreed to in terms of privacy obligations, or maybe they had to negotiate something unique for that particular district. This is a way to communicate that information to the tech team for the consuming vendor to make sure they know and they follow those obligations before they receive any data.
Great. If I'm a school district, I guess wanting to do, you will work with the school district directly.
Correct.
Do you primarily work with whole states, or do you see kind of both?
Both, really. I mean, we work primarily with states. We've begun working with local districts directly now because of the demand for this new capability to take that data flow that they're already shipping to the state and really benefit them. Some districts are starting to say, well, we don't want to wait for our state. We want to just go ahead and get started now.
Okay.
So we can do either.
Great. Well, thanks for hanging out with me.
Yeah, appreciate your time.
All right. Mark was saying how he used to be from Maine, so I ventured out and pulled someone that had a Maine name tag.
There we go.
So, Kathy, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. What brings you to the A4L Summit?
So I'm Kathy Warren. I'm the Education Data Manager for the state of Maine, for the Maine Department of Education. And so I am here because Maine does a lot of work with the open source community and the CEDS data standard. And we're partners with Cedar Labs, Ben's company, in building our state longitudinal data system.
Okay, awesome. How long have you been doing that?
So I came to the department in 2018 as our data systems manager, and we got our first SLDS grant in 2019, and we started building out our longitudinal database. We had Maine passed legislation in 2016 to build an education data warehouse where they were looking to be able to connect cradle to career data in the state of Maine.
So, and I know that you're with the Department of Ed, but I'm going to ask you a workforce to the grave question.
Sure.
Because we have talked a lot about K-12 today.
Yes.
And then we did piece together K-12 to higher ed. But what are we talking about when we talk about getting it to go into the workforce to continue on? What does that mean for those things to be connected?
So there's a whole bunch of different connections. So I actually, in my sort of non-education life, especially coming from a small community in Maine, I spent a lot of time involved with the Island Institute, who supports small communities, and we work a lot with community resilience. So when you're looking at community resilience, you're looking at what your small business infrastructure is in a community. You're looking at what industries you have, what jobs people are doing, whether it's carpenters or electricians or whatever. And so if you have things like mill closures that impact your workforce, you need to look at what activities are going on in the area, what resources are available through like adult education or community colleges, how the community college structure for Maine, it's part of the university system. Are those sites and courses actually accessible to citizens who need them? So this data helps us support all of that. Where are people? What kind of education, amounts of education do they have? What's the economic data from the Department of Labor that says what industries people are working in? What's the business concentration? What are your leading economic drivers, like one of Maine's leading economic drivers is lobster fishermen, or tourism. And so what do those industry employments look like? Are you actually training people, educating people to go into those jobs, whether it's because of workforce displacement or whether, whatever, people re-entering the workforce from various, different disruptions. COVID, comes to mind as a good example of that. So one of the areas in Maine, for instance, that we knew we needed people in and we needed to figure out where there were people who needed jobs and how you would train them is elder care. Oftentimes there's a lot of resources, mixed resources between adult ed programs that are offered in the local community through a K-12 school. Like I mentioned, community college, remote learning. There's a lot more of that going on where the community colleges are offering online learning. So pulling all those things together, the economic data, the education data, where are the teachers that can teach those classes? Where are the plumbers and the electricians who can go into the CTE schools, and help offer internships? In one of our sessions this morning, we talked a lot about trying to stop using words like K-12 and post-secondary to talk about education. It's lifelong learning. It's citizens. Lifelong learning's gotten some, it's a bit overused or just, whatever at this point. But it's what's the quality of life for citizens? What's the quality of place in communities? How do you maximize that? And how do you use data to make informed policy decisions about how to use taxpayer dollars? Legislatures are looking for this information, and it's taken us a while to get this infrastructure built for various reasons. Political leadership doesn't last very long. 4 years isn't much when you're talking about implementing technical systems and priorities change. And so we're hoping to get this one done.
Yep. I like it. There's work to be done, but the work is being done.
There is. It's, education is the thing that if you do it right, changes everything else.
Yep.
We can't keep looking at the assembly line model of the Industrial Revolution to think that it's going to solve this problem. Like, we are reinventing public education. That is what we're doing here, and it's democracy. So I think it's pretty exciting to be talking about how to make that happen.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for hanging out with us, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Chris?
Mark. I mean, we're making it.
This has been a very, very long day in terms of, like, we started at the beginning of the day, probably the beginning of this episode, like, what's A4L, what's PESC, what's data privacy.
Yep.
And over the course of the last, 6-7 hours, it made sense.
I'm a fan of SIF.
Okay. You don't know what it is.
But I don't believe my district anytime soon is going to be in a place of implementing it in a way that it deserves to be implemented.
That was a common theme too. Like, we talked with a lot of people who really believe in this, but they're also very realistic about, like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to bring this to action.
Right. I am now more for student data privacy than ever before in my life.
Fantastic. It's
I
a thing.
might go get that A4L tattoo. And the whole vibe, of course, of interoperability.
Yeah.
Yes, we want things to talk.
Yeah. It was cool as well to hear the intersection between data privacy, student data privacy, and interoperability.
Yep.
Started to make a lot of sense, especially as we start talking more about SIF.
Yep.
So I feel like I learned more about student data privacy today than I have in the last 5 years.
And I think I said the word SIF more than ever in my life.
Did you ever say it before today?
Like, if I'd sneeze and if I was in the middle of speaking, I would sneeze. That's about it.
Well,
DC's been great.
This has been fun.
Yep.
Fun town.
A4L.
A4L. Chris, see you next week.
Yep. Josh, we miss you.
Miss you, Josh.
Josh, if you get to the end of this episode and you're still listening, I don't know why you're here.
All right. See you next week. The views and opinions expressed on the K-12 Tech Talk podcast are the personal opinions of Josh, Chris, and Mark, and do not represent the views or opinions of our sponsors or other organizations that we're affiliated with. The material and information presented here is for general information and entertainment purposes only. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.